Daniel had traveled far across empty space, searching for lost signals and forgotten ruins. But nothing in his long journeys prepared him for the silence that hung over the abandoned mining colony on the edge of the galaxy, where his ship now rested on cracked landing pads surrounded by broken towers and rusting machines that groaned under the pressure of centuries. And though the air was still breathable, it carried the bitter scent of ash and metal, a reminder that something terrible had happened here long ago, yet had left no clear trace of life or death, only emptiness. And as Daniel walked slowly through the deserted streets with his helmet light cutting faint lines across the shadows, he felt an unease he could not explain, for it was not the kind of silence that follows time and dust, but the kind that presses on the chest, heavy and expectant, as if the place itself was watching, waiting. And then, just as he thought he had imagined the faint flicker of movement in the corner of his vision, he heard it, a voice so soft, so fragile, that it barely reached him through the static of his communicator. A voice that did not belong to the wind or the ruins. A voice that trembled like the cry of a child, and it whispered words that froze him in place. "Please, human, pretend to be my daddy for just one day." And though Daniel had faced strange requests and strange beings in his travels, never had he been struck by such an odd and desperate plea. And he turned his light toward the sound, his pulse quickening, his instincts telling him to be careful, for there are no children in places like this. And yet, crouched between two broken cargo crates, was a small figure with glowing eyes that reflected his light like liquid silver, a frail girl with pale skin that shimmered faintly in the dark, wings folded close to her back, trembling as though she had been hiding for a very long time. And Daniel lowered his weapon slowly, for she looked not like an enemy, but like something abandoned. And when her eyes met his, he saw a fear that was too deep to be faked, and she crawled forward, on shaky legs, clutching a tattered piece of fabric as if it were the last comfort she had, her voice breaking again as she begged, "Please, just for one day, pretend you are my father." And Daniel, confused and uncertain, felt his throat tighten, because behind her plea was something raw, something that reached beyond species or language. And though he wanted to ask questions why she was here, where her people had gone, what dangers still lingered in the colony, the urgency in her voice left no space for demands. So he knelt, resting one hand on the ground to show he meant no harm, and told her gently, "It's all right, I'm here now." And at once she moved closer, clutching his arm with surprising strength for her size, pressing her head against his shoulder as if she had known him all her life. And though his heart raced with unease, he did not push her away, because something in her touch was more human than he expected, not alien, not strange, but simply lonely, unbearably lonely. And as they stood together in the ruins, Daniel realized that the silence around them had changed, that the colony was not as empty as it seemed, for the shadows between the buildings shifted when he moved, and every step echoed too loudly. And the girl, sensing his unease, whispered with fear trembling in her voice, "It is still here, the thing that took them all. It waits in the dark." And Daniel felt his blood run cold, because now he knew that whatever had destroyed this colony had not left, it was still hunting. And he, a stranger who had come chasing a weak signal, had walked straight into its waiting arms. Yet now he was no longer alone, for the child who called herself abandoned had made him her protector, her chosen guardian, even if only in a game of pretend. And as the darkness pressed closer, Daniel understood that one day of pretending might mean the difference between life and death. Daniel had faced strange requests before in his travels across forgotten worlds, but nothing compared to the moment he found himself walking through the broken colony streets with a fragile alien child clinging tightly to his sleeve, calling him daddy in a trembling voice that mixed fear with desperate hope. And though he knew it was only pretend, the weight of her small hand pressed against his arm stirred something inside him that he could not ignore, something he had not felt in years, as if the girl's simple trust placed a heavy duty upon him. And as they passed through ruins of metal towers with shattered glass windows, Daniel kept scanning the shadows, every step making him more aware of how unnatural the silence felt, because it was not the quiet of a place long dead, but the kind of silence that hides something waiting. And Lyra, that was the name she whispered. Shyly, when he asked, seemed to know it too, for her wide silver eyes darted nervously from one dark corner to another, and sometimes she would tug his arm and whisper, "Not there, Daddy, not that way," as if her instincts guided them away from unseen dangers. And Daniel wondered how long she had been hiding here alone, how many nights she had survived with nothing but fear and the memory of parents who never returned. And though he wanted to ask more, the fear in her eyes kept him quiet, for he sensed that pressing her too hard would only hurt her more. So he let her cling to the game she had created, pretending he was her father, pretending they were not surrounded by death and ruins, pretending there was still safety in this broken place. Yet Daniel's mind kept working, piecing together clues from scorch marks on walls, from shattered machines with deep gouges in their frames, from old tracks in the dust that looked too uneven to belong to normal feet. And the more he studied them, the more he realized this colony had not been abandoned but hunted, its people scattered and taken one by one until only this child remained. And if that was true, then the predator that had done it might still be here, unseen but close, perhaps even watching them now, waiting for its chance. And this thought tightened Daniel's chest with unease, yet he kept moving, because leaving the girl behind was not an option. And as they moved through a wide corridor where broken lamps hung like dead eyes, Lyra suddenly froze, her small fingers digging into his sleeve, and she whispered, "Daddy, it's close," her voice so faint it was almost lost in the air. And Daniel's instincts flared as he raised his light, sweeping it across walls and ceilings. But the beam caught only dust and metal, nothing solid, nothing clear. Yet his gut told him she was right. Something unseen was indeed moving, sliding across surfaces in silence, and his breath grew shallow as he listened, straining for any sound. But there was nothing except the slow crack of settling metal and the faint hum of broken wires. And then, just as he began to lower his guard, there came the soft scrape of claws against stone, quick and sharp, echoing from somewhere behind them. And Lyra's wings folded tightly against her back as she pressed against him, eyes wide with terror, whispering again, "Don't look. Daddy, if you look it will see you," words that sent a chill straight down his spine, because they carried the ring of lived experience, of nights spent hiding from something she dared not face. And Daniel, though shaken, tightened his grip on her hand and pushed forward, deciding that the best way to protect her was not to freeze, but to move faster, to find a place that offered cover. And soon they stumbled into what once had been a living area, its walls covered in cracked screens and broken lights, its floor scattered with toys and clothing left behind as though people had fled in a hurry. And the sight of small belongings abandoned mid-use filled Daniel with a heavy sadness, reminding him of homes lost in wars long past. But Lyra bent to pick up a small carved figure lying in the dust, clutching it to her chest as if it were the last piece of her old life. And Daniel felt the weight of her loneliness more deeply than ever, realizing she had been pretending long before she met him, pretending each day to be brave, pretending not to hear the creature moving outside, pretending her father might still return. And now she had given him the role of filling that empty space, even for just one day. Yet Daniel could see in her eyes that she hoped it would last longer, that she hoped he would not leave her behind when he found his way off this cursed world. And the thought of abandoning her tightened his chest with guilt, for he knew he could not bring himself to do it, not after seeing her fragile courage, not after hearing her voice call him father with such trust. And as the shadows stretched longer across the ruined room, Daniel realized that the game of pretend had already become real in a way he had not expected, because now he was her protector, whether he wanted to be or not, and the creature lurking beyond the walls seemed to sense it too. For the silence deepened once again, pressing harder, heavier, as if the darkness itself was waiting for him to slip. And Daniel, with his pulse racing, whispered a silent vow that no matter what hunted them in this place, he would not let it take her too. Daniel knew that hiding in one broken room would not keep them safe. So the next morning he led Lyra deeper into the colony, searching for answers. And as they walked through hallways filled with broken panels and scattered debris, his mind kept circling the same thought: what had really happened here? And why was this small girl the only one left alive? And the more he studied the ruins, the more he noticed signs of chaos that were not caused by time, but by fear. Doors forced shut with makeshift barricades, walls scratched with symbols he could not read, messages left in haste as if the colonists had tried to warn each other of something terrible to name. And soon he found a control room where the screens were shattered, but the recording devices still blinked faintly, and with a few adjustments he managed to bring them back to life. And the sound that filled the air was not the comfort of voices, but the trembling cries of those who had lived here. People shouting about a monster that could not be seen, about shadows that moved even when no light was there, about friends disappearing in silence without even a scream, and Lyra clutched his sleeve tighter, shaking her head and whispering for him to stop. But Daniel forced himself to keep listening, because the truth was buried in these echoes, and soon a voice that sounded older, steadier, spoke of how the colonists had tried to fight back with weapons and traps, but nothing worked, because the creature was not like any enemy they had known. It was not flesh alone, it was something that slipped between light and dark, something that fed on fear as much as on flesh. And the voice ended with a broken cry, the sound of someone who knew their end had already come, and then the recording fell silent again, leaving only the sound of Daniel's own breathing and Lyra's soft sobs as she buried her face against his arm, whispering, "It took them all, even my father, it will take us too." And Daniel, though his chest tightened with dread, refused to let her words sink into him, for he had survived too many dangers to let fear break him now. Yet he could not deny that the shadows in the room seemed thicker, darker, as if they listened, as if the creature itself was aware of their discovery. And he turned off the recordings quickly, scanning the corners where his light beam seemed to weak, and he thought he saw movement just beyond reach, a slow curling of darkness like smoke that vanished when he tried to focus. And his instinct screamed at him to leave before it was too late, so he guided Lyra away, her small steps quick and nervous, her silver eyes wide with tears she tried to hide. And as they moved through the ruined corridors, she whispered stories of how the colonists had once laughed and played, how her father had promised her the mines were full of treasures and light. But then the shadows had come, and one by one her friends had disappeared. And soon there were only whispers in the night, and her father had told her to hide while he went to stop it, but he never returned. And she had waited and waited, until waiting became too heavy, and now she did not know if he was alive or dead. And Daniel, hearing this, felt a heaviness in his own chest, for he understood now that her plea for him to be her father was not only the wish of a lonely child, but the desperate cry of someone who had already seen everything taken away. And though he told himself he was only playing a role for her sake, in truth the bond between them had already begun to grow, for he could not see her as anything but his responsibility. And he swore silently that whatever creature haunted these ruins would not take her too. But as they turned a corner leading toward the mines, the air grew colder and heavier, and Daniel heard once again that faint scrape of claws against stone, closer than before, too close, and Lyra stopped suddenly, her wings folding tight, her body trembling as she whispered, "It follows us always, it never stops." And Daniel raised his light, forcing himself to appear calm, though his pulse raced, and he whispered back, "Then let it follow, but it will not have you." Though even as he said the words he felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon him, as if the creature already marked them both as prey, and the ruins around him no longer felt like simple metal and stone, but like the lair of something alive, something ancient. And every step forward carried the sense that they were not walking into safety, but deeper into a trap woven long before they arrived. Yet Daniel tightened his grip on Lyra's hand and kept moving, for turning back was no longer an option. And in that moment the silence of the colony felt less like emptiness and more like the slow, steady breathing of the monster itself, waiting for its chance to strike. Daniel led Lyra into the mines because he hoped to find tools, power cells, or even a working escape craft hidden in the lower hangars. But the deeper they went, the more the walls seemed to close in, rough stone, mixed with jagged metal, dripping water echoing through the tunnels like faint footsteps. And though he kept his weapon ready and his light steady, his nerves burned with unease because every sound seemed to answer back with another sound. as if the mine itself had a pulse, and Lyra clung to his sleeve, her wings shivering against her back, whispering that she remembered coming here once, with her father, that he had promised her the darkness was safe if she stayed close. But now she felt it watching them, and Daniel wanted to comfort her, but even he felt it, a pressure that pressed from all sides. And when his light cut across a corner, he caught sight of something that froze him where he stood, a shape that was not fully there, like a smear of shadow against the stone, moving in a way that no shadow should move. And when he stepped closer, it slid away as if melting into the rock, silent and patient. And his heart pounded harder, because now he understood what the recordings meant. The predator was not flesh as he knew it, but something that lived between forms, not fully seen yet terribly real. And as he raised his light again, the air seemed to bend, and from the dark emerged a figure stretched and shifting, eyes glowing faintly like embers deep within smoke. And Lyra whimpered, burying her face against him as she whispered, "That is the thing, Daddy. That is what took them all." And Daniel tightened his grip on her hand, his other hand clutching his weapon, though he doubted bullets would matter, against something that seemed half mist and half muscle. And the creature did not rush, did not roar. It only moved slowly, circling them as if enjoying their fear, its body flickering between stone and shadow, its claws scraping the ground with a sound sharp enough to make the hair on Daniel's neck stand on end. And he realized with growing dread that it could strike whenever it wished, that it had been following them for hours, maybe longer, studying them like a hunter that knows its prey cannot escape. Yet in Lyra's trembling voice he heard something that kept him steady, because though she was afraid beyond measure, she had not let go of him. She still called him father, still believed he could protect her, and that belief forced him to stand taller even as fear clawed at him. And Daniel spoke firmly into the darkness, telling the creature that it would not take her, his words sounding small in the endless echo of the mine, yet carrying a weight that even the monster seemed to pause at, for it stopped its circling and crouched low as if testing his resolve, its glowing eyes flickering like fire that grew brighter with each heartbeat. And Daniel's mind raced for a plan, for some way to fight something that was barely there. And he remembered the collapsed machinery near the lower tunnels, remembered the energy cells that could still be unstable, and he realized there might be a way to turn the mine itself into a weapon, though it would mean leading the creature deeper, closer, risking both his life and Lyra's. But he saw no other choice because running was no longer possible. The monster was too fast, too clever, and as he guided Lyra carefully toward the tunnel ahead, whispering for her to trust him, he knew this moment had changed everything, because he was no longer pretending to be her protector, no longer playing at being her father. He had become it in truth, and if the creature wanted her, it would have to go through him first. And the thought of that gave him strength enough to keep walking forward into the shadows, even as the hunter followed, silent, patient, and hungrier than ever. Daniel knew he could not run forever, so he led Lyra deeper into the mines where twisted machinery and half-collapsed tunnels created a maze of shadows and broken stone, and every step echoed like a drumbeat that seemed to call the creature closer. Yet he forced himself to stay calm, because panic would only destroy them both, and Lyra, though trembling, kept her small hand in his, whispering that she trusted him, words that gave him strength even as the air around them thickened, with the sense of the predator drawing near. And when they reached the chamber he had remembered, a wide cavern filled with cracked support beams and rusting mining drills, Daniel quickly studied the ground, noticing energy cells leaking faint sparks where they had been left to rot. And an idea burned in his mind, dangerous but possible, that if he could lure the shadow into the center of the room and then bring down the ceiling, with the unstable equipment, he might crush it beneath tons of rock, though part of him feared that even a mountain might not be enough to kill such a thing. But he had no other choice, so he whispered his plan to Lyra, telling her to hide behind a broken control panel until he called for her. And though she begged not to leave his side, he promised her with firm words that he would not let the monster take her, and with tears in her silver eyes she finally nodded, clutching the carved toy she carried as if it were her shield, and slipped into the shadows while Daniel stepped boldly into the center of the cavern, his light sweeping in slow circles as he shouted into the darkness, daring the creature to face him. his voice echoing with more courage than he truly felt. And the silence that followed was so heavy it felt like a hand pressing against his chest, until at last the shadow came, flowing down the walls like smoke spilling from unseen cracks, its glowing eyes fixing on him with hunger that needed no words. And it moved faster than his sight could follow, circling, twisting, testing, its claws, scraping sparks against stone as if mocking his challenge. But Daniel stood his ground, raising his weapon and firing into the shifting blur, the bullets passing through parts of its body, but making it stagger for only a heartbeat, before reforming again. And he realized then that ordinary weapons would never be enough. So he ran toward the unstable machinery, his boots striking sparks against the rock, and the creature gave a sound like a hiss mixed with laughter as it pursued him, its body stretching long and thin, its claws slicing through metal beams as though they were paper. And Daniel ducked beneath falling debris, pulling at loose supports, with all his strength, forcing them closer to collapse. But still the monster pressed him, slashing near his shoulder, cutting through his jacket, its cold touch burning like ice against his skin, and pain shot through him. But he did not stop, for he thought only of Lyra hiding, waiting, believing in him. And that belief drove him to his final move, grabbing a heavy energy cell leaking sparks and slamming it into the main support beam with a shout, the impact bursting with light and fire that rolled through the cavern, and the ceiling groaned, stones cracking, metal shrieking, as the entire chamber began to fall. And the creature lunged at him in that moment, claws outstretched. But Daniel dove aside, feeling the rush of wind as it passed, and then the ceiling came down. A roar of thunder and dust as rock and steel buried everything in crushing weight, and the monster's hiss turned into a distorted scream that echoed through the tunnels, before being cut off by the avalanche of stone. And Daniel lay on the ground coughing, half buried in dust, his body aching with bruises and cuts, but alive. And when the rumbling faded and silence returned, he heard a small voice calling Daddy through the smoke, and Lyra ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck as tears streaked her face. And though Daniel could not be certain the creature was truly gone, he held her tightly, whispering that it was over, at least for now. And in that moment he realized that he had not only fought for survival, but for something far greater, the life of a child who believed in him, a child who had given him a reason to fight even when fear tried to break him. And as they stood together in the fading dust of the ruined mine, Daniel knew the battle was not the end, but only the beginning of their struggle. Yet for the first time since landing on this cursed world, hope flickered in the dark. The mines had fallen silent after the collapse, but Daniel did not trust silence anymore, for he knew too well that silence in this place could hide teeth and claws. So even as Lyra clung to him with relief in her trembling arms, he kept his eyes on the shifting dust, waiting for movement, listening for the scrape that had haunted them since their first steps into the colony. And though nothing came, though the monster's scream seemed truly buried, he forced himself to move quickly, guiding Lyra through the broken passages until they found a side tunnel that led back toward the surface, his body aching with every step, but his grip on her hand never loosening. And when at last they emerged into the pale light above, the ruined colony stretched before them like a graveyard of steel and stone. Yet in that graveyard Daniel felt a strange strength rising inside him, because they had survived, and in surviving they had claimed something the monster could never take: hope. And with that hope he turned his thoughts to escape, to the wreckage of ships he had seen near the landing bays. And for 2 long days he worked tirelessly, scavenging parts, rewiring circuits, patching holes with scrap metal, while Lyra stayed close, sometimes helping in small ways, sometimes only sitting nearby humming softly as if her voice could keep the darkness away. And each time Daniel's hands faltered with exhaustion, her silver eyes lifted to his with unshaken trust, and he found the strength to continue. And at night when they rested inside the half-repaired craft, she would curl beside him and whisper that she was not afraid anymore, because she had her daddy now. And though he had told himself it was only pretend, only a role he played to comfort her, he realized with a quiet heaviness that he no longer thought of it as a game. For in every look, every word, every smile, she had become his daughter in truth, not by blood but by bond, and he could not imagine leaving her behind or breaking the fragile trust she had given him. And on the third day the shuttle roared to life with sparks and shudders, but its engines held, and Daniel lifted it from the cracked landing pad into the endless stars, Lyra gripping the seat beside him with wide eyes filled with wonder. As the dead colony shrank below them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled, a smile that carried both relief and the beginning of something new. And as she turned to him, whispering with shy hope, "You won't stop being my daddy now, will you?" Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotions he could barely name, and he placed a steady hand on her shoulder and answered that being her father did not have to be pretend anymore, that as long as he breathed, she would never be alone again. And Lyra's small hand reached for his, holding it as the stars stretched wide before them. And in that endless dark where so many had been lost to unlikely souls, one human and one alien child found each other and became something more than survivors. They became family, and that bond was stronger than any shadow that had tried to claim them.